today's video, we are doing another positional top 10. This time we are doing top 10 defensive backs of all time. But before we get into the video, I want to take a second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. Really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel as we release multiple NFL-related videos every Tuesday and Friday all year long. Now, let's get back to the video. Starting out at number 10, we have Paul Krause, legendary safety for the Minnesota Vikings. Back in the 60s and 70s, the Vikings were one of the best teams in the NFL, but they just never managed to get over the hump. With Paul Krause as their safety, they were able to make it to 4 Super Bowls, but unable to win any of them. That being said, the fact that Paul Krause, during the entirety of his 16-year career, only missed 2 games with an injury, and he is the all-time leader in interceptions in NFL history, there is no way you can do a top 10 without including Paul Krause on that list, which is why he comes in at number 10. At number 9, we have the only primarily defensive player to ever win the Heisman, Charles Woodson. Now, obviously, this is the top 10 greatest defensive backs in the history of the NFL, not college football, so we're not going to count the Heisman, but Charles Woodson's NFL career is nothing to sneeze at all, and he's definitely deserving of the 9th overall spot on this list, based exclusively off his NFL career. Charles Woodson is one of the best defensive backs of all time, and he is tied for the league lead in history for the most defensive touchdowns in the NFL, along with 2 other guys, one of which is still to come on this list. Beyond that, what makes Charles Woodson so good is his versatility. When he was a young player in the league for both the Raiders and the Packers, he was a stud at cornerback, being one of the best shutdown corners the NFL had to offer. But when he got a little bit older in his career, he managed to shift from being a cornerback to a safety where he was able to play at a little bit of a slower pace, but still be every bit as effective and be one of the best free safeties in the NFL during that time. Charles Woodson's ability to play in both defensive back positions, as well as being able to be one of the best ball hawks in the league, makes him number 9 on this list. And it doesn't hurt that he won a Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers to boot. At number 8, we have Derrick Rivas, and Derrick Rivas was probably the toughest person to slot on this list. For those of you who remember Derrick Rivas, you probably remember the absolute beast that was Rivas Island, the guy who made it so that you literally could not pass to one side of the field on the New York Jets and helped them make it to 2 straight AFC championships when Mark Sanchez was their quarterback. However, the truth about Derrick Rivas is that version of Rivas only lasted for about 3 years. After that, he was shortened to a 2-game season prior to leaving for 1-year tenures in Tampa Bay, as well as New England, where he was able to win a Super Bowl and make it to some All-Pro and Pro Bowl teams on those teams. And eventually he moved back to the Jets, where he had 1 decent season before eventually calling it a career. However, if you look at that history of Derrick Rivas, only 3 years as a top-tier cornerback, and only another probably 3 years as a good above-average quarterback in the NFL. We never really got to see prime, dominant Derrick Rivas for a long period of time, which is why it's tough to put him really high on this list. But I still felt he deserved to be in the top 10 because of how dominant that peak was. And so I feel like number 8 is a justifiable space for Derrick Rivas based almost exclusively on how amazing his prime was, in spite of its shortness. At number 7, we have Ed Reed, one of the most dominant safeties of the 21st century. Ed Reed, along with Ravens linebacker Ray Lewis, helped to make the Baltimore Ravens one of the most dominant defenses in the NFL for over a decade, and eventually helping them win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback. Though I will admit, Joe Flacco was pretty good in that Super Bowl run. Ed Reed was one of those do-it-all safeties. Yes, he was never the captain of the defense because that was Ray Lewis who was calling the shots, but Ed Reed over the top, you couldn't throw on him because he could make some remarkable plays. There's a phenomenal play of him against Peyton Manning where he manages to read exactly what Peyton Manning's going to do, and he bolts away from the pass that Peyton Manning wants to make, and without even looking at Manning, he turns back around and makes the interception because he knew exactly the read that Manning would make, and he was able to counter it by playing the exact read he knew Manning would read off of to go to a specific guy. It just shows you how smart of a cornerback Ed Reed was and how great a safety he was at that. Beyond that, he was also a big hit tackler. So yeah, he could defend you in the pass game, but you want to run on Ed Reed, you're going to get popped. And so those two things combined, as well as his greatness in making the Baltimore Ravens one of the best defenses for over a decade, is why Ed Reed is number 7 on this list. At number 6, we have Champ Bailey, and many people might relate Champ Bailey to Derrick Rivas and wonder why Derrick Rivas is not as high on this list. But those people are probably a little bit like me, who didn't really see Champ Bailey in his prime, which was the early 2000s on the Washington Redskins, as well as in the mid-2000s on the Denver Broncos. Champ Bailey was a quintessential shutdown corner in the league, but not just for a few years. He was a quintessential shutdown corner for the better part of a decade, making both those Redskins and Broncos teams some of the most feared defenses in the league. Now, sadly, Champ Bailey was not able to win a Super Bowl during his career, retiring only a couple of years before the Broncos were able to eventually win a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning at the helm. But Champ Bailey still goes down as one of the greatest cornerbacks of all time, and probably the greatest cornerback of the 21st century. At number 5, we're going to go back, and I mean way back to the 50s and 60s with Dick Night Train Lane. I really debated whether I wanted to put Night Train on this list because he did play the entirety of his career in the pre-Super Bowl era. I mean, 2 of the teams he played for, you'd know, the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Rams. But the other team, the Chicago Cardinals. That's how long ago Dick Night Train Lane played. And because of how long ago he played, it is quite tough to get a good understanding of how good he really was based on footage or based on anything like that. And so I'm deferring to some of the greatest minds of the NFL game and of the people who did watch football back in this era. And basically every single one of those people puts Dick Night Train Lane up as one of the greatest cornerbacks of all time and the prototype for what was to become the modern day NFL cornerback. And so because of the legend of Night Train, because of how dominant and long his peak was, and because I do think there should be some representation from people that are a bit older in the NFL, for all those reasons, I have put Night Train Lane at number 5. At number 4, we have Pittsburgh Steelers cornerback Mel Blount, and if you go to any defensive position, you are going to find a top 10 guy who played for the 70s Steel Curtain era Steelers. It's just a matter of fact that this has to exist because of how dominant that defense was. Yes, those 70s Steelers teams had some decent offensive pieces, but let's be honest, Terry Bradshaw was not winning 4 Super Bowls without a remarkable defense that probably has never been matched in the history of the NFL in terms of its all-around talent compared to everybody else in the league at the time. The Steel Curtain is most well known for their defensive line as well as Jack Lambert backing them up. And so the way to beat those type of teams you would think would be throwing the ball. Well, you would think that would work, but when you have a guy like Mel Blount backing up that Steel Curtain, it makes that pretty hard to do too. All told, Mel Blount was just an absolute stud. He could pick off the ball, he could tackle you, he could make plays in the run game, he could do everything at the cornerback position, and so that's why he's number 4 on this list. And 4 Super Bowls. Pretty damn good. At number 3 on this list, we have another Pittsburgh Steelers defensive back legend, Rod Woodson, though this guy did not play during the 70s Steel Curtain era. Rod Woodson is tied with Charles Woodson, I don't believe any relation, as one of the 3 players with 13 defensive touchdowns in their career. That is an NFL record for both of them. And Rod Woodson really just did it all. He could tackle you in space. He could shut you down on the outside. He was a great blitzer. He scored defensive touchdowns, and he was a punt returner throughout the entirety of his career. Well, he wasn't able to win a Super Bowl during his time with the Steelers, which is the time he's best known for. He was able to eke out a Super Bowl right at the end of his career with the Baltimore Ravens. Sorry, Steelers fans, to have to know that he won it with the Ravens, but it's what happened. All told, Rod Woodson was the prototypical superstar cornerback who might not have had the same attitude as some other guys at cornerback, but this guy had the same play style as all of them, and he absolutely belongs at number 3 on this list. And in our penultimate number 2 spot, we have Ronnie Lott, our highest ranked safety, primarily of the San Francisco 49ers dynasty of the 1980s. Now, the main thing I can say about Ronnie Lott was he was the hardest hitting his safety in the whole history of the league. Move over, Darren Sharper. Ronnie Lott was him when it came to hitting guys. This guy basically covered the entire middle of the field, because if you threw it to your receiver over the middle, you knew that Ronnie Lott may be putting that guy in the hospital. Now, this style of play really doesn't exist in the 21st century, minus maybe Troy Polamalu, but Ronnie Lott did that at an elite level that, in my opinion, was way above a guy like Polamalu. And there's a reason the 49ers dynasty started to stagnate in the 1990s after Ronnie Lott left this team, because this guy was the heart and soul of that defense. And while, yes, the 49ers dynasty was best known for their offensive ability and players, they would not be the same dynasty they were if Ronnie Lott wasn't an absolute force on the back end, being one of the most impactful defensive players of all time. And so his 4 Super Bowls, the fact that he's the hardest hitting his safety of all time, and his ability to just defend everyone everywhere is why Ronnie Lott comes in at number 2. And at number 1, we have Neon Deion Sanders himself, coach of the Colorado Buffaloes and former NFL cornerback. But in all seriousness, Deion Sanders is just an absolute freak of an athlete. Not just a cornerback, freak of an athlete. This guy came into the league in one of the greatest top 5s in NFL draft history. In that top 5 include himself, Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, and Troy Aikman, along with Tony Mandarich, who we're not really going to talk about. But Deion Sanders came into the league for the Atlanta Falcons and dominated from the get-go. He was a shutdown corner on the outside. He returned punts and kicks at an elite level. And just for fun, he decided to go play baseball too. And not just play, he was a legitimate contributor for an Atlanta Braves dynasty while he was also playing for the Atlanta Falcons. And then when he was tired of losing with the Falcons, he ended up moving on and joining the San Francisco 49ers, where he won a Super Bowl in year 1. And then left the 49ers, going to their arch rival Cowboys, and then bringing them back to the Super Bowl the very next year. Deion Sanders literally felt like in the mid-90s, he was the guy who determined who was going to win the Super Bowl as long as he was on an above-average team. And then the year after winning those 2 Super Bowls, what does Deion Sanders decide to go and do? Well, he decides he's going to become a wide receiver too, and literally starts at wide receiver as well as defensive back for the Dallas Cowboys, starting in 15 of 16 games and putting up nearly 500 receiving yards in an era where Troy Aikman alone never threw for over 3,500 yards. So a decent chunk of the team's yardage went to Sanders. One of my biggest questions in NFL history is how good could Deion Sanders have been if he just focused on cornerback? But this guy could really do it all, and there's a reason he was still the best cornerback in history. And despite doing it all, it's because he was just a freak athlete. He had the confidence. He was a guy who could make Super Bowl champions on the turn of his colors and uniform. And so that's why he goes down as number 1 defensive back of all time. But that's it for our top 10 defensive backs list. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to leave a comment down below. Like the video, help us out, help us grow. Either way, I'll see you all next time. Peace!